right. Tell us about that debate with James White, because I tell you what, I mean, if I was in your shoes debating him back in the 90s, was it? I think
93.
I think I would have been quite prickly, because it just seemed like the dialogues between Protestants and Christians, they were like that. I mean, both of you were prickly towards each other, I think.
Yeah.
Even unnecessarily prickly. But I think if I was you back then, I would have done the same thing, because it's like you're dealing with someone who's being arrogant and telling you that you don't care what the Greek in the New Testament means. It's almost like rhetorically you have to kind of jab back at him. But yeah, just tell us what that debate was like, because I would love to
Yeah,
know.
I have a number of things I'd like to share on that issue. First of all, I'd like to kind of begin in the present, if I may, and I'll take you back in time in a moment. But I like James White, and I have a lot of respect for him. I don't agree with a number of things that he teaches, and he doesn't agree with a number of things that I teach. But I have respect for him, and I recognize that he is sincere, and he's also, he's very formidable. But formidability does not equal correctness. And I'm sure he would agree with that as well. That formidability is one thing, but correctness is another. But I want to grant him that and say at the outset that I like him and I have respect for him. Casting my mind back to 1993, it was very hot that day. It was, by San Diego temperatures, it was unusually hot. This was in Chula Vista. And it was in an Orthodox Presbyterian church that had no air conditioning, because by and large you don't need air conditioning in San Diego, as you know, because you lived there for a while.
Yep.
But that particular day it was very hot, so everybody was a bit cross. Everybody was a bit grumpy that day, because we're in this inferno of a church building that must have been 100 degrees inside. And James and I were wearing suit and tie.
Oh.
So it was doubly uncomfortable for us. I remember there were these big box fans that were blowing air. That was at least a bit of relief. But just from a human standpoint, it wasn't pleasant. And I felt sorry for the audience. They were enduring all this heat. So that was just a reality that we dealt with. We also were both approaching the debate after several years. So this would have been 93. I first met James in 89, I believe. So this is the better part of 4 or 5 years of skirmishes and disagreements and, letters back and forth and mutual criticisms and things like that. So we came to the table already with a kind of backlog of mutual irritation with each other. And from a human standpoint, I'm sure that did not make things any better. And we were both defending a position that we both deeply believe in, and we have our reasons for believing it. And we wanted to make the very best case we could in the short period of time that we had. And so being younger, I'll speak for myself here, I can't speak for him, but being younger at the time, I was 33, and apologetics certainly is in some sense a spectator sport. So that you've got a certain group of people who are cheering for you, and that you've got a certain group of people who are hoping you'll lose. The more spectacularly, the better. And everything's being recorded. So there is a kind of pressure to perform and all of that. So I think that's where the prickliness really came from, was that it was it was style that sometimes got in the way. And as the old saying goes, you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. But until you learn that, you might try to use vinegar all the time and not be so successful. So to whatever extent I'm guilty of being unnecessarily prickly or being condescending or any of those things that I have no trouble imagining that I was, I certainly repent of that, and I don't think that I do those things now. And I would have to guess if you were to speak to James White, he would probably have a similar reaction. Just looking back on it now, we're older, and you might have done things differently. So,
well, I think it takes
a
a lot of humility to do a public debate, because you can only learn from your mistakes, and in a public debate, all of your mistakes are now public, and everybody's listening to them and watching them. I spoke to Trent Horn about that, who's a very good debater, I think, a very competent debater, and he'll say the same thing. Like, there's a bunch of things he'll point to and say, now everybody sees that, and I'm a little embarrassed about that, but I think that does take a lot of humility.
Yeah.
Because you could just sit in the wings and say, well, he's wrong, and I'm never going to kind of put my money where my mouth is,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, apologetics is a rough and tumble sport, especially at that level when you're doing public debates and everything's recorded and you're on record now.
Hmm.
And there's pressure. There's no question about it. Some people handle that pressure better than others. And when you're young and testosterone driven and you're seeking to, really define yourself, sometimes those excesses can creep in. But in any case,
Well,
those are just
I think you,
extraneous to
I
me.
really do
So
think you did a stellar job. My, as honest as I can be about the assessment of the debate, I would say, I thought that James spoke far too quickly, like he was trying to put too much in than he had time for. So I thought just rhetorically that was just unhelpful, And then I thought you made so many great points. One of the points you made was, I think if I'm remembering correctly, James said something to the effect of the man of God, right, will interpret the scriptures correctly and know what the scriptures mean, etc. And you pointed to the fact that the pastor of that very church held a different view than perhaps James did or somebody else did on, say, infant baptism, and that unless James was going to accuse everybody who disagrees with him as being not a man of God, that was fantastic. It was just so clear. And then the fact that you kept holding him to how do you know what the scriptures are, and he never was able to give a good answer for that. I didn't think.
fair enough. I agree. I'm sure James would not agree with you, but fair enough. We all have our own biases. The one moment in the debate that sticks out of my mind is it seems to me this was during the cross-examination, and he asked me a question to the effect of, "Can you show me any tradition that's necessary for salvation that's not in the Bible?" And I responded by saying, "Well, the canon of the Bible." And I don't remember whether I said the canon of the New Testament or just the canon in general, but either way, that was one of those interesting moments where I think he thought I was going to raise a Marian teaching or perhaps the Holy Eucharist or perhaps something like that. I didn't get the impression that he was expecting me to raise the canon issue. I don't know what he thinks about that. I'm sure he remembers it. I don't know what his recollection of that is, but that was my recollection, that it seemed to be one of those moments in the debate where there was a kind of a bit of the unexpected. I don't think the audience expected that response from it.
No,
But it was a spirited
great point.
debate. We both tried really hard. It was one of those things where I'm glad we had the debate. As a mark of, I guess, as a mark of how important I think the debate was, it's required for all of my students who take my course in apologetics at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. I teach that every semester, as you know. And I also teach at St. Patrick's Seminary and University in Menlo Park, so training future priests. They all have to watch that debate, and they study it in detail because I want them to get the full effect. I want them to hear the full, all the arguments that can be brought in the space of 3 hours. And of all the debates that I've done, that debate seems to have been the most impactful on people. And to this, I mean, look at us, we're talking about it,
Yeah.
all these years later, because it still resonates and it still has something to contribute to the current state of apologetics, I think, anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad that he and I had that debate. He challenged me to the debate. I didn't seek it, but we did have the debate. I'm glad we did, and I think it is helpful in showing kind of how the two sides approach this very important topic.
And I think another thing that's interesting is these are really perennial issues. And so maybe you studied very hard, I'm sure you did, to engage in this debate. But then it's like, as a human being, you naturally start gravitating to different interests.
Yeah.
But what I find fascinating is there's always a new crop of Christians who are fascinated in this issue who would have thought, right, that, as I say, 15,000 people have listened to this debate just on my channel in a week who may have not
and
heard.
if you look at the YouTube version, I didn't even know there was a YouTube version until a few years ago. Somebody put the recording and put it out there. And by the way, the pictures of us on the YouTube are not what we looked like back in those days. My hair was not white in those days.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and I don't know how many views that's had. But I still to this day, I hear from people who say hearing that debate was very important for me and it had a big impact on me. So I'm really glad in retrospect that we did that debate. I think it was helpful.
I am too. It's been very helpful to me, as much of your work has, Patrick. So honestly, I know it's hard sometimes for me to take affirmation, but I just want to thank you for your humility, for your love of Christ, for your emphasis on the intellectual life. You've helped many people kind of my age who probably wouldn't be Catholics if it weren't for people like you helping us. So sincerely, thank you for your work.
Thank you, Matt. That's high praise coming from you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this clip. You can click here to watch the full episode. And I want to say a big thanks to our sponsors and to our amazing patrons for making all of this possible. Please do us a favor before you go. Click that subscribe button and then the bell. And that way YouTube will be forced to let you know every time we put out a new episode.